Hi Sebastian. I'm making a video today to run over some things. When I looked at your figure studies, mannequins, small mannequins, some things occurred to me. So there's some, I think, important things to remember when drawing mannequins. Because they're simplified figures, it can actually fairly easily get where you it's somewhat abstract, and it's easy to forget that what we're trying to do is make drawings that are based on a real physical figure. So because we're drawing lines and we're simplifying forms and things like that, it can sort of get out of hand a little bit, and there are things that we can forget to include. So here, for example, this one's just off the top of my head, and hopefully, I could look at this objectively and notice weaknesses in this. Some things about this that do work. I didn't draw a gesture line first, but you can see that a gesture line does travel through, and then a line comes off it like so. This is a weight-bearing leg. So the inertia with the figure moving in this direction, because the balance is right under there, well, in this case, this figure is probably about to stop walking, running, jogging, whatever it is that it's doing, because of where the balance is placed. So balance and gesture are kind of interlinked. So imagine a line of balance, gravity going down the center of the earth, and a gesture line crossing over. Now, if I put masses on here, and there's a danger, doing masses of getting one a little too far away from the other, or not having it representative of the shape of the mass and things like that. In this case, I'm a little loose with the head because I'm really not quite sure what the figure is going to be doing. So anyway, we know this is the point of balance here, so a leg can certainly connect to that. Now, as far as this line of balance, let's just pretend that this figure is not moving, that it's stationary. So on this side of the line, the amount of weight that we have is quite a lot. It's a leg, torso, and head. On the other side is most of the torso. So in order to balance this weight on this side with weight on the other side, we bring some things over. We wouldn't necessarily have the arms coming out this way unless the body was moving this way. So in this case, we need to get as much mass as we can over on the other side of this line. So you see what I do? I put the arms back like so. Now we have a figure where it's somewhat plausible that this figure could be frozen, well, just basically not in action, just standing like this. It wouldn't it would be awkward to do that, but I hope you see what I mean with the gravity and the gesture line. And having said that, the fact that everything in the body has some kind of weight to it. Here's another example. Here's a balance line. And say, for example, we put hips over here and we put torso over here a bit. Bend the head back. Now this is a very flexible pose, so this might be a woman's pose. Well, we want to bring something down to this point here, right under the pit of the sternum. So that's fine. That balances. See, and how much is on this side and how much is on this side? We want that to be somewhat balanced. Now that's a bit of an exaggerated pose. But I hope you can see how that balances according to this line. So you don't necessarily have to include the line every time, but being aware that it's there helps a lot. So more about masses. Basically what we're talking about, masses are not necessarily drawing simplified masses rather. Here's a figure where everything's more or less finished. Right? It's somewhat naturalistic. Everything drawn in. Now, where the actual rib cage would be in this, there's a lot of meat on top of bones. So the rib cage would be something like this. Actually not very big. Now, you can certainly draw mannequins using a skeleton type structure. And I do this, and it does help sometimes to freshen things up a bit. Right? But somewhere between this and between this, you can create a mass which is closer to sort of this, the whole thing, and closer to the hips and not so bony. And you know, you can this is bigger than the skeleton would be, but you get used to using this. And there again, it's you don't want to run the risk of having things getting too idealized or too, I'm sorry, couldn't see that, too abstracted. So another thing to keep in mind, very important when you're drawing a figure, and it helps to do this the first time that before you start drawing, is what we might call a body type. So a lot of times, you know, you just might start roughing in a figure doing something or other, and you know, this could be a man, it could be a woman, it could be 6 feet tall, 3 feet tall, not necessarily always thinking about that. But you don't have to do it that way. You can start with the figure type in mind. And it really, really helps because it draws you away from this sort of sketchy abstraction into reality. Now, I don't use much reference material in my self-drawing, but this is some stuff I happen to have laying around, which I got recently. These magazines are ancient. They're from the 1960s or 70s. And in this case, you know, it's a body type, it's a bodybuilder, different sizes. This fellow's 5 foot something, this fellow might be 6 feet tall. And I don't go for the bodybuilder aesthetic myself, but at some time in the past, late 1800s, there were figures that were more like Greek statues and things. This is a strong man, Eugene Sandow, from back then, and this is the kind of thing that I tend toward more myself. Not overly muscular or exaggerated. So another figure which I find to be the most nimble and the most lithe and strong is male gymnast. So male gymnasts, you know, a lot of times they are 18 to 20 some years old. They have very, very good upper body strength in the shoulders and chest because they're able to do all sorts of events on rings and horses and things like that. So imagine if you're drawing, now we have that body type in mind, and we start drawing, and we have a young fellow. He's quite strong, strong upper body, you know, not incredibly tall, perhaps not even 6 feet tall. He might be, you know, competing in the Olympics, for example, and could basically look something like this. Now, when this gymnast is doing exercises on the floor and things like that, and we want to turn that into a fantasy scenario, well, it's quite easy to think of that body type, gymnast, in motion, in very, very good physical condition. You see leaping somewhere, for example. Okay. So knowing the body type, and male gymnast, same thing for female gymnast. A female gymnast is not going to have very much extra weight in terms of fat around the midriff or breasts, things like that. Is going to be quite muscular and capable of action, motion, the kinds of things that we're used to seeing them do. So that's another body type. Now, you someday might want to, we know what the superhero body types are, where they're completely off the scale, and they're perhaps light bodybuilders in a way, but the heads are, tiny, tiny, tiny heads, and, not that you necessarily want to do this, but I'm just showing it because that's a treatment that is out there that people do. So that's one as well. So body type. The thing about doing these mannequins is, it helps to feel the pose, know what type of figure you're doing, and not let them get too fantastic or too detached from what a real person could be doing. So one thing you can do is feel the pose yourself. Where is this something I could do? If I were doing this, would I do it this way? Frank Frazetta, because he was athletic, he worked this way. He felt a lot of the poses, probably all the poses that he did. And that's why his figures were so good, was because he understood action and strength from inside himself, in a sense. So the truth is that in real day-to-day life, people hardly ever vary much from these straight up and down. If you go out in the street and look at people are either doing that, they're standing straight up, or they're sitting down at a chair somewhere, something like that. These tend to be, or people might be, lying down asleep. We don't really get that much of this sort of thing in reality. It is, so in a sense, it is uncommon and, in a sense, an exaggeration. Now, another important thing is poor posture. Now, poor posture is slouching. The chin tends to come up. This comes out like so. There are times when you may want to do this. You can make a muscular figure slouched, and it adds a certain quality, which you might want to use sometime for certain illustration. All right? At rest, figure at rest in a sense. Also, the thing about male poses versus female poses, what's called contrapposto. It's from Italian, and it has to do with, it might be one word, I'm not sure. It has to do with having the weight on one hip. So we're kind of used to this with female figures, right? Where the weight is on one foot, mainly, like so. And we think, this contrapposto with the shoulders going one way and the hips going the other way, that's, very feminine. But you can have a male figure do the same thing. In fact, the statue of David, where David is holding the Medusa head, is it really feminine? It's a very male figure, but he is doing the contrapposto pose. So more so than people might think, you can interchange poses, and when you put the male anatomy on it, it's like no one is the wiser. And it's good because the figures become a bit more flexible, and we move away from sort of the strong man idea. So okay, that's quite a bit of stuff for right now. We covered body types, Contrapposto, balance, gesture lines. Here's another trick. If, as a child, I don't know if you had these, but we had toys that were basically plastic army men. And so there was a plastic base, and then there was a figure doing something, holding something, molded into it. Well, this type of idea is actually very good because for drawing, because if you imagine the ground that the figure is on, and you notice what I did here was I came up from the ground, like so. And I didn't know which way the pelvis was going to tilt, so I'm kind of surprising myself. Now here's another surprise. I'll do the forearm. I didn't know which way this was going to go either. But now I've got something interesting and somewhat accidental, which could be turned into an interesting pose for something. So another thing that happens with when we're doing mannequins is that there's a tendency to, we want to show all of everything. So we show all of every limb, all of everything. And in reality, this almost never happens. So in reality, what will happen is that you'll see things will be obscured. Part of this leg is obscured. The other arm isn't visible at all. Right? And so when we're learning to draw, we tend to do this a lot, when actually the reality is this. So take a stab at doing this, hiding things. And here's another trick. You just draw a torso first. Right? Now, in this case here, we're seeing this from the side. We're not really sure if it's coming toward us or away from us or what. In this case, this might be coming toward us, this away, but it's really hard to tell. We haven't put cylinders, we haven't put cylinders on it where we can really tell which direction things are going in. But here's something. If something is straight on to us, it's at its complete scale, complete length. However, say this arm was going away from us, it might be shorter. Okay, now this arm we can make longer than that because that is directly perpendicular to our vision. So look, short, long, long, short. I put simplified fists, hands on there. And here again, long, short, short, long. So this leg, we're seeing most of that. This leg is foreshortened and coming toward us. See? And you can see where this is headed. Is like now we're moving into figures that are more interesting, less cliche than, well, a few sheets ago. Anyway, back at the beginning. So anyway, I'd like to see more figures where the ground is taken into account, the line of balance, the gesture, and these variations on limbs and things. Now, I would also say, well, this is the balance line. Now, if we want intense action, certainly you can make the balance line go in a different direction and change the gesture line as well. So here's a more action type figure, right? Running. So if you analyze photographs, you'll find that what really happens in nature, in the world, in terms of people's action, if you look at something like a field of football players, for example, and what's going on with the bodies, what they look like, and things, it's interesting to study that, and you'll find that it's not necessarily what you expected, and it may not be represented in your drawing. So, Anyway, all this is probably enough for today. It's quite complicated. There are a lot of different approaches, and please try doing some of these. You can take sheets and just work with these ideas, fill them up, as I've done here. These figures are no more than about 3 to 4 inches tall. Okay? Bye-bye.